Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. In our final conversation with Dave Butler, he's the author of Plain and Precious Things, we're going to talk more about the Book of Mormon and temple theology from a skeptic's point of view. Would skeptics be persuaded by Dave's arguments? We'll find out what he thinks in our next conversation. You won't want to miss it. Check it out. Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Because from my perception of what you said...
I'm crazy?
No. In order to see the Book of Mormon as a temple text, you have to have experienced the temple ordinances.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
It's very helpful.
Because I would suspect people who are not LDS, who have not participated in a temple ceremony, would probably not be persuaded that the Book of Mormon is a temple text.
Yep, that might be right. Although I would say this. I had some of this conversation with two friends, a Catholic and a Lutheran, driving down to a science fiction convention last week in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And they actually raised this in a discussion about like, hey, the Eucharist, is it a symbol or is it actually the flesh and blood of Jesus, right? Because we have great ecumenical conversations.
Well, that's a Catholic big deal,
that's
right?
That's right. And again, it was a Catholic and a Lutheran, so they had different views of this.
But Lutherans are just Catholics, aren't they?
That's
what my Lutheran pastor friend told me.
That's almost my friend David's position. It's almost. I could almost get there, I think he would say. And they had this discussion, and then they said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, look, I said, here's the official LDS position, right?" And I talked about it. I said, this is what we do. This is how we talk about it. And I said, let me tell you the Davist view. And I discussed much of what we just said, not all of it, but I jumped right into Matthew 6, and I said, and Jesus identifying himself as the bread in Luke 22, and also John 6. And I kind of thought they were going to say, Dave, stop the car and get out. You can walk the rest of the way. But actually I said, that's actually I think that's right. That sounds right. I think what I have yet to do is to sit down and have this conversation. I have a friend who's a Dominican up at the University of Utah, and I want to talk to him about this. I think that there's another way to see all of this, or that if I were coming at this as a Catholic and take the Book of Mormon out of the picture, okay? So let's say I was just seeing the Sermon on the Mount. I think, and someone pointed out to me all this liturgical stuff. I think I would say, wow, this is interesting. What we are seeing here is something related to the Mass. And remember, the Christians were persecuted as cultists, and they had scandalous secret love feasts no one could come to. So I think there is actually a kind of a potential ecumenism here. But it's a kind of ecumenism that we are not good at, and I don't know if anyone else is either, because it would be an ecumenism that says, hey, look, here is this thing. It appears to be ancient. It appears to be liturgical. And it also appears to be an elephant of which each of us has a different part and a different perspective. But maybe we can all look at it and see that it is real, and that can give us a way to talk about what we have in common, and even liturgically, like beyond just like believing in God or believing in Jesus. About 3 weeks ago, I drove to Denver to play banjo at a funeral.
Oh, wow.
Yes, as one does. And so I went to the first Catholic Mass I'd been for a long time.
Like banjo at a Catholic mass?
Well, it turned out that it was a funeral mass, and it turned out that the priest didn't want the banjo in the mass. So after the mass, everyone went to like the activities hall adjoining, and once they had food, I stood up and said, explained why I was there, and I led everybody in singing a Cat Stevens song with me picking on the banjo. This is at the request of the deceased. Yeah,
I wouldn't have expected a banjo at mass, so that makes more sense.
It feels a little indecorous for mass itself, right? The banjo is a very loud. There's no subtle banjo playing, right? There's no reverent banjo. Yeah, so I hadn't been to a Catholic mass in a long time, and it was very striking to me the part where. And I don't know enough about Mass to know like how universal this is, or if like how much Masses vary. And so this is why I need to have a conversation with my Dominican friend and get some sources to read. So I'm speaking way out of my bailiwick, and the only reason I'm willing to do that is because I actually have no bailiwick at all. I'm just a guy in your ward. Okay. Before the actual blessing of the Eucharist and the taking of the sacrament, right? There was an admonition that we all had to be peaceful, and everybody had to give each other. I think they called it the greeting of peace. I think it might have been the kiss of peace at one time, but like literally, we turned around and depending on how well you know them. I gave people hugs when a couple of friends I've known for a while, and there were some strangers, so I kind of tried to give them, hearty kind of handshake plus elbow grab, like more than a handshake kind of thing. So that we had to be peaceable to be able to have the feast of the Lord's flesh and blood. And there was, and I've forgotten it, unfortunately, there were further discussions or iterations of peace and peaceableness in connection with the Eucharist. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because that's actually quite parallel to how I read Matthew 6, where I think you become a peaceable one as you enter in, and then you have the feast. And it is the feast presented by the peaceable King of his own flesh and blood. So I felt like someone was saying these words back to me and saying, look at this. And I haven't, it's just been a few weeks and I've been on the road and I'm just a guy in your ward. I don't have I got to figure out how to do this. But I want to look into it from the Catholic point of view and say, or the Lutheran point of view more, and say like, well, what is this? What else can we see about this? Because I think although an LDS reader, a Mormon reader, looks at Matthew 5, 6, 7 the way you and I did, I think it's very hard not to go, holy cow, there's the endowment. But it is also not exactly the endowment, right? Like the order is not always exactly the same, and there's like sacrament in the middle of it, and like that's kind of odd, and right. Mm-hmm. So it's something. I think it's better to say it seems to be a temple ordinance. The story seems to be the garden story. It is a complex and sophisticated ordinance. It bears some strong resemblances to the endowment, and I think I think that's one of the great keys through which we're meant to read the Book of Mormon. And I think, look, I'm a guy in your ward. I don't know. We're under condemnation for treating the Book of Mormon lightly. I don't know that this is the answer, right? But I know we have to think about it harder than we have been, and we have to live it better than we have been, or we don't get the rest. And it's been 195 years, and I'm tired.
Okay. One more question, and I'll let you go.
Okay, hit me up.
I know there's a lot of people, and they seem to be coming out of the woodwork with my Val Larson interview.
Oh.
That want to say the Book of Mormon is Bible fanfic. It didn't happen,
Yeah.
There are other people who don't care.
Now, do they see themselves as Mormons who are saying this, or are these like your Protestant friends?
Usually ex-Mormons.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've spoken with Mormons that are like, I don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical.
Sure.
and I can still find great value. And I think these are the kind of people that can listen to you and be like, wow, what great insights into the Book of Mormon.
Sure.
So,
and maybe still not believe the Book of Mormon is authentic and ancient.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what do you have a position on that?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think the Book of Mormon is literal history?
I would use different words. I would say I think the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be. I think it's authentically an ancient document. I think I read Eberhau's Mormonism Unveiled.
Oh, really?
And found it greatly faith-affirming.
Was that Dan Vogel's version, or did you read it?
I think it was Dan Vogel's version.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And I read it and I was like, okay, it has all these affidavits, right? Hurlbut goes and gets all these affidavits. And people who I think we should take seriously, like Joseph's father-in-law, right? Who like talk about him putting his face in a hat, right? And like that seems to be what happened, is that he put his face into a hat and dictated a 500+ page, extremely complex narrative. Now, look, people who have not written a book can sort of shrug this off and go, oh, he was very clever and creative. BS. Okay, my 18th novel came out in January. I am a fast and a good writer. I could never do that in a million years. No human being stuck his face into a hat and dictated the Book of Mormon as fiction. It just didn't happen. Okay, look, there are historical challenges, right? I don't know about horses, man. That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that question. Okay, but the length and complexity of the book alone, as well as the onomasticon, the complexity of the poetry in Alma 36. I like it. So I told you I like to close my Elders Quorum lessons with so what discussions. I also like to pose what I call the Genius Joe hypothesis, which is sometimes defenders say, well, shucks, Joe was just a down-home country boy and he could barely read. How'd he possibly write him that there Book of Mormon? I don't know. It must have been God, right? That's not it. The question is, assume Joseph Smith was the smartest man who ever lived, and that he secretly had access to the current libraries of the best homes and universities in New York City. Okay? He couldn't have written that book. There's just no way. And the 1,000 casual incidental bullseyes are hilarious. Like the name Alma, right? He says, here's this guy, his name is Alma, he's a man. Joseph gets made fun of it for this, right? Doesn't he know Alma's a woman's name? Ha ha, it means nurturing, it's Latin, what a dummy. Until Yigael Yadin goes and publishes his, and I've got this book on my shelf at home, he excavates the caves where a bunch of documents get hit at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So this is in Israel in 125 AD. Simeon Bar Kokhba briefly has a messianic kingdom. Some of the early rabbis, or he has a kingdom. Some of the early rabbis say this is the Messiah, but then he gets crushed by the Romans. Okay, but he has coins and stuff. And Yigael Yadin,
didn't he die on Masada?
No, Masada's earlier. Masada is Titus and stuff. Masada is 70 AD. He's like 3 generations later. Okay. 125 AD. I could be wrong. Something like that. So Yigael Yadin goes and he, in these caves or in the Judean hills, finds all these documents from that time, including in his book, he has his translation, okay, Jew, Israeli, got no interest in the Book of Mormon. He has this legal deed and says this land belongs to Alma ben Yehuda. And he translates the name Alma, A-L-M-A. Now, the name is Alma ben Yehuda. We know two things. One, the guy's a Jew. Two, he's a man. Right? That's what we know. Yeah. So in 125 AD, Alma was a name a man could have in Israel. Right? Joseph doesn't make a big deal out of it. He just has his name Alma a couple times, gets mocked for it for 150 years. There's just no way. Now, look, I don't want to fight about this. I don't want to debate with anybody. I don't think it's worth it. People who will look at it seriously will go, wow, there's something here. If they want not to, then let them not. Right? Then let them not. If they're more comfortable saying, this is not true, this can't be true, at this point, it's on them, right? I'm not interested in debating the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. I'm well beyond that. We need to talk about the meaning of the Book of Mormon. What are these guys trying to say to us, and how are they trying to say it? And that is my interest.
Okay. So do you know where the Book of Mormon took place?
Oh, interesting. I love the fact that the Heartland guys are proposing an alternative and that they are doggedly putting up a debate even when sort of the sort of institutional resources are against them. Uh-huh. That's great. We should have that debate. I thought that Jonathan Neville's book, is it called Moroni's America? Uh-huh. Was very provocative. Mm-hmm. And he says, look, I don't know where these things happened, but let me put forward what I think is a plausible model, which suggests, if this is a plausible model, we ought at least be open to the possibility that maybe these things happened in North America, as Joseph and Oliver seem to have believed the whole time, right? And it's doggone interesting. Like those passages where in, what is this, Mosiah, where like the Lamanites are pursuing Limhi's band or Alma's band, and like after 2 days they lost them. And he says, look, in a jungle, that you're not going to lose anybody, right? Like if they're chopping down trees to get through, they're leaving a big path. He said, but if they're on canoes and they get to a junction of the rivers, of course you lost them, right? It's very interesting. I'm not saying it's right. My belief in the Book of Mormon could survive if somebody said, actually, it turns out the Malaysia hypothesis is correct.
I'm glad you knew about that.
I'd be like, favorite. Or Baja. I'd be like, all right, man, color me surprised, but I can live with it, right? Again, for me, the interesting thing is, what are these guys trying to tell us? And it is the shared map, and it is, back to Denver Snuffer, the real thing that this is a map of, which is the spiritual path we are all on, whether we want to be or not, and attempting to enter back into the presence of God.
Very good. All right. Well, any last thoughts you want to share with us?
Rick, I feel like I've said way too much. We're probably double the average length of your interviews, but I appreciate you giving me the time.
You're right there with Val Larson.
Okay, good. And I apologize for all the people who are now going to be angry at you.
Well, you'll have to check out the YouTube channel. That's where most of my comments come from. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
All right. Well, Dave Butler. Oh, I do have one more question. So these books, is it more than one book about the temple that you have?
I read 2. They're on Amazon. The first one's...
Give us the names.
So I write under different versions of my name, so that because I do write like science fiction novels and stuff, and I don't want like some Gentile fan of mine down in Texas who likes the witchy war to like pick up plain and precious things about the temple and be like, what the heck, right? Like I want people to sort of
separate them in your mind.
To knowingly read books, not be surprised. So I published these under the name D period, John, John Butler. It's kind of a little cultural joke, right? This is like the general authority name, D. John Butler.
Okay.
It's just my name, but right? So D. John Butler, Plain and Precious Things is the first one.
Okay.
And the second one's called The Goodness and the Mysteries. You should probably read them in that order. Especially in the second one, there is a whole bunch of stuff that we did not talk about today about the Book of Isaiah and other stuff. If you find books and you're like, the cover art looks good, but man, the cover layout is terrible, that's you're looking at the correct books.
All right. And so you've written, 16 other books in science fiction?
18 novels. My second short story collection will come out later this year. Novellas. Yeah. So I have a website. If you want to check out my fiction, davidjohnbutler.com is a place you could do that.
All right. And you're not a seminary teacher?
I'm not. Yeah. I am an elders quorum secretary. I schedule interviews with the elders quorum president. That's what I do.
All right. Well, Dave Butler, I appreciate you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Mm-hmm. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dave Butler. Dave, it was super fun sitting down and talking, and we'll have to go to lunch sometime for sure. So if you haven't purchased his book, Plain and Precious Things, or The Goodness and the Mysteries, check those out on Amazon. They're under D. John Butler, because, Dave's kind of a semi-general authority there. So anyway. In our next conversation, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Michael Austin. He's the author of The Testimony of Two Nations, and we're going to talk about how he approaches the Book of Mormon.
Yes. This is a close reading of the Book of Mormon in a very specific context. And if I can kind of explain the context problem in Book of Mormon studies is probably the most significant interpretive problem that we have, which is that there is not agreement about what the context of its creation was. Was it a Hebraic context post-Babylonian exile or pre-Babylonian exile? Was it a Mayan context? Was it a 19th century American context? And those all produce wildly different readings of the Book of Mormon.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.